share with you about a course I'm going to teach in June. It will be a short course, only 3 lectures, on the theology of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Here, this is our website, and here we have below the courses, free courses, and the paid courses. If you get to the paid courses, you have here 4 courses. This is already now done about the book of Daniel, and it's like 8 lectures. This is the Aaronic blessings. I'm gonna do it soon. Unraveling the difficult sayings of Jesus. Tony is working on it. And then in June, I'm gonna do the secrets and the theology of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it will start in June. It's gonna be 3 lectures on June 14, 21, 28 at 7 p.m. Central Time. And we're gonna go on depth about the levels of translation. The first level is the Targum. And I explain what is the Targum in Aramaic and how the Dead Sea Scrolls, the sect, looked at it. And then I'm going to do the second level of translation, understanding scripture, which is the Midrash. Today's scholars were interested in the daily life and how people think at that time of history. And from the writings, we can know. So it's in depth, the theology. And then the Pesher, which is the inspired decoding, the eschatology of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna put the link on the chat. If anyone is interested to go into layers and depth, you can go to that course. So this is what I'm planning to do in the month of June. But again, let me get to the subject now, and I'm gonna share with you about, let me record. The role and impact of the Septuagint translation on early Christianity in a positive way. I want you to understand that the Septuagint is the earliest ever Greek translation to the Hebrew Bible, I mean the Old Testament. And that translation served a vital link between Judaism and Christianity. So in this presentation, we will explore its origins, what is the Septuagint, its significance, why the translation is important, and its importance to diaspora Judaism, and its role on the early Christianity, how the Septuagint had a positive effect on our faith till today, the translation. So I'm going to talk about different subjects. This is an introduction. We're going to speak about the historical context. Then we're going to explore the reasons behind its creation and why the ideal setting of Alexandria was important in order for this translation to take place. We'll also discuss the theological and some linguistical implications of the Septuagint that made an impact on early Christianity, and followed by the role of the early church fathers. And until today, it reflects so much relevance and legacy of the Septuagint, even for today, because that is a great, great translation. So the Septuagint represents the first major Greek translation ever happened in the entire world through Hebrew scripture. And we are talking about 3rd century BC. We are talking about the reign of Ptolemy II Philadelphus, the Greek ruler of Egypt at that time. He commissioned the translation of the Hebrew scripture, which is the Torah, into Greek for the Library of Alexandria. I don't know if you heard about the School of Alexandria. It is a huge school started from centuries, from the Greeks, and it's an important place on earth where many translations took place. And not only the Greek translation, and later the Aramaic school, and later it's a very important place. So the Septuagint is very important and essential for us to understand how biblical narratives were interpreted and adapted across different cultures over time. It's an important subject. And how it started, why Greek? Because when Alexander the Great took over the Near East around 333 BC, many Jewish communities began speaking Greek and adopted parts of Greek culture. So when you invade a country, you don't invade only territories, you invade the languages. And part of that was Egypt. And there were so many Jews in the diaspora in Egypt that no longer knew any Hebrew because of Hellenization. So they needed the Old Testament in Greek, of course, which was the common language at that time. So the creation of the Septuagint translation was driven by the need for Greek-speaking Jews to access their scripture in a language they understood, ensuring the preservation of their faith and identity, and not only in the land of Israel, but in the diaspora in Egypt and Asia Minor and other places. So the Septuagint emerged as a crucial text for Greek-speaking Jews, bridging their heritage and the new international language at that time to preserve their scripture. So without the Septuagint, you have to know Jews who didn't speak Hebrew wouldn't have been able to read the Bible. This would have made it very hard, even for Christianity to spread beyond Jewish communities if there was no translation. Imagine Greek was like English today, international language. If the translations did not take place, it will not spread. It would stay probably in Antioch, Alexandria, and Jerusalem. That's all, the Hebrew scripture. But of the Greek positive influence, it was able to spread to the Western world. How we know about the Greek translation? According to an ancient story called the Letter of Aristeas, Ptolemy asked that 72 elders and from each of the 12, like they have to gather from the 12. He actually sent a letter to Jerusalem, to Eliezer, one of the high priests, and he asked 6 from each of the 12 tribes scribes to be sent to Egypt to do the translation. And they sent him a translation from the temple in Jerusalem, a very good quality Old Testament, the Pentateuch. I'm talking about the first 5 books of Moses, inscribed in gold. And anything come out from the temple of Jerusalem is very, very, very holy and is a good original translation. So, and the legend says, the story of Aristeas says that 70 translators from all these 12 tribes came, 6 of each, which is 72, but the letter says 70, were separated and ended up with exact in several rooms, in 70 rooms, and they ended exactly the same translation, a sign many believed was a miracle. So this story of Aristeas, which is a long story, elevates the authority of the Septuagint by portraying it as divinely sanctioned and royally approved. How come we know about that? Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish philosopher, believed this Greek version was just as inspired as the Hebrew one. Now, the Septuagint gave Greek-speaking Jews, as I said, living outside of Israel, a way to read their sacred text in the language they used every day. This helped them keep their faith and identity while living in places like Egypt, Asia Minor, and Greece. And as I said, it was one of the first major Bible translations and a big moment in both religious and cultural history. Its importance went beyond the Jewish community, and this is where it affected the Gentile world. And then early Christians used it as their main Bible because it was available in Greek, the common language. So the words and style of the Septuagint deeply influenced how early Christians understood and taught their faith, helping spread the gospel across the Greek-speaking world. And its effect in the Western church is still till today, its positive effect. So Alexandria was a hub of cultural exchange. This is like Alexandria in Egypt on the Mediterranean Sea. It's such an important place, named, of course, after Alexander the Great, making it the perfect environment for the translation of the Hebrew scripture. The city was very multicultural atmosphere, and there's so much diverse groups of people living there. Do you know that the biggest Jewish population outside the land of Israel is in Alexandria. Alexandria was like a city where many cultures, I said, meet, including Greek and Jewish mixed together and Gentile, making it the perfect environment for the translation of the Hebrew scripture into Greek. And so Jewish people living there needed their scripture translated and in order to preserve it. Because Alexandria was a center of learning and trade, was the perfect place to carry out such a big translation project. Now, at first, the Septuagint helped Greek-speaking Jews, right? As we mentioned, keep their religious identity. But it also became useful for non-Jews, the Gentiles, who were interested in Jewish beliefs, which is the church. And because it was in Greek, many people outside the Jewish community could now read and learn from it. So Christians, early church, started to use the Septuagint because they spoke and wrote in Greek. The words and ideas from the Septuagint shaped how they understood Jesus and explained their faith. So what started as a translation for Jews became a powerful tool for the growth of Christianity. In simple terms, the Septuagint opened up the Hebrew Bible to the whole entire ancient world, helping Christianity spread across different cultures and then different languages. Now, when the translation of the Septuagint took place, we know that it is a Koine Greek, because Koine Greek is the lingua franca. It was the everyday language most people spoke at that time. Remember, in Jesus' time, they spoke Aramaic. That was the lingua franca. And by the way, the lower class you are, the more you speak Aramaic in the land of Israel. The lower class you are in Egypt, the more you speak Koine Greek. Now, Koine Greek is not a perfect Greek. It's the slang language. And this is why it's make it from the heart. It's not like classical Greek or classical Hebrew or classical Aramaic. It's the language of the people. So Koine Greek became the common language across many regions, including where many Jews lived outside of Israel. And since many Jews in the diaspora did not use Hebrew anymore in daily life, so translating the Bible into Koine Greek made it easier for them and others to understand. And of course, it helped them to spread the scripture to more audience. Now I'm going to take some linguistics examples. And for example, the word Torah is originally Hebrew in the Masoretic text, but when the translation took place into Koine Greek, they used the word nomos. Now, the Hebrew word Torah means not only nomos, law, not legalistic, it means more teaching, instructions, and guidance. It includes all of God's commandments and wisdom in the Bible. So the shift from the word Torah to nomos illustrates a significant change in language and interpretation of religious text. Logos literally means law. It's more in a strict sense. This made the focus more about the rules and regulations and commandments rather than the broader teaching. As a result, people in the Greek-speaking world started to understand God's instruction in a more legal way, which is something positive in a way. So the change from Torah to Nomos affected the perception and applications of laws in daily life and worship and more legalism. And this is the shift where the Greek mindset entered to the early church by translating and languages. And that something can be good too. So the church fathers relied heavily on the Septuagint translation to shape early Christian beliefs. Since the New Testament writers already used the Septuagint, the church fathers continued using its words and ideas to teach about Jesus and explain Christian faith. Do you know that Jesus would use the Septuagint? Do you know that the disciples also will use the Septuagint translation too? Because it existed at their time. The language of the Septuagint became the foundation for Christian theology for generations to come, even till today. I'm going to give you 3 examples from linguistic perspective, because the Septuagint played a significant role in the way today Christians think in the West and their concepts, helping to articulate beliefs about God, Jesus, and salvation. I'm going to take three terms: Kyrios in Greek, which is Lord translated to English, but the original Torah is Yahweh. And Logos, of course, in John chapter 1, verse 1, is the word in Greek, but in Hebrew is different, dabar, which is to speak into. And then another word I'm going to take, Christos, anointed. The Mashiach is anointed. Christos is Jesus Christos, the anointed. How the terminology was changed. So I'll start with Kyrios, which means Lord in Greek. So the Septuagint used this word to translate the divine name Yahweh. Yahweh means Haya, Hove, Yehyeh, the past, the present, and the future. Yahweh means everything in the Hebrew scripture. But it was translated to Kyrios, to the Lord. So when the New Testament writers, especially Paul, called Jesus the Lord, they were saying that Jesus is the name as the God of Israel. Yahweh. Yahweh is much more expansional. And this was a powerful way to show that Jesus is divine when it gets to the Lord. The Lord got connected more to the name Yahweh in Greek translation, and became a key part of early Christianity beliefs. Another word, logos. Logos means word in Greek. In the Septuagint, it was used to describe God's wisdom and reason. You see the Greek way of thinking, especially in books like Proverbs and Wisdom of Solomon. And by the way, in Hebrew, it's davar, which literally means to speak or declare. But when it's written in Logos, the Gospel of John uses this idea, saying Jesus is the Logos, the divine word who was with God from the beginning. This shows that Jesus is the living wisdom of God, involved in creation and revelation. By the way, the Hebrew word davar, the original word, carries the power of action. What God says, gonna happen, gonna be revealed. It aligns with the creative and dynamic nature of the Logos in John's Gospel. So the Greek word logos is rich and layered in meanings. And its simplistic way from understanding it from Greek to English, it means word as spoken or written expression, but it also means speech or discourse, referring to a person's act of speaking or communicating a message. By the way, in Greek philosophy, logos means reason or rational thought. It's the inner logic or understanding that guides how we think and explain things. You see how the writer John was affected by the Hellenism and the Greek way of approach, and he wanted to reach the Greeks, so he spoke in the language and the translation of the Greeks. Also, logos can mean account or explanation, like when someone gives a reason for their actions or tells a story. Or to a structure or principle of order behind the universe, especially in ancient Greek thought, where logos was seen as the rational force that governs all things. But davar is different. Davar carries the power of action. It's dynamic, what God says will happen. Anyway, you see the words translations. Now, I want you to know that all translations are great. God uses the Greek translation to reach more Gentile people of thinking in order to reach to salvation. All right. So all translations are great. Any translation you pass through, because it speaks to different crowds, to different people at different times of history. So let me go more into the logos. In John 1:1, the gospel writers uses logos with a theological meaning. Let me try to tell you how maybe John was thinking that Jesus, the Messiah, he pre-existed, is divine and active in creation. That is the Logos here is the self-expression of God, incarnate in human flesh, the eternal wisdom and word through whom all things were made. That's echoing Genesis chapter 1. Anyway, Philo, a Jewish also philosopher in Greek Alexandria, gave interpretations for the Logos theology. I'm speaking first century. So Logos as a divine, he said, intermediary between God and the world. The Logos was seen as the instrument of creation, a bridge between the transcendent God and his material creation. Philo describes the Logos as God's wisdom, reason, and creative word. Now, another word called Christos or Christos in Greek, which is Mashiach in Hebrew, and in English is anointed. So the word anointed was turned to Christos. So the translation would clarify more, and Christos solidified Jesus' role as the fulfillment of the messianic expectation, prophesied in the Greek version of Isaiah, Daniel, and the Psalms. So in the Septuagint translation of Psalms and Isaiah, Christos carries strong messianic expectations of a divinely anointed king. And in the New Testament, also translation, it identifies of Jesus as the Christ. Let me take you an example, Matthew 16:16. Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christos, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God." This verse is Peter's profound confession of Jesus's identity. The Greek word used for Christ is Christos here, which translates into the anointed one. So the Greek directly draws on the Septuagint terminology, presenting Jesus as the fulfillment of Israel's hopes for a messianic deliverer. The point I want to make with all these words and from the Greek translation, it strengthened the Christian faith for non-Christians, for Gentiles. And it was even carried by the early church fathers. They built on the language of the Septuagint to explain who Jesus is. We have early writers and early church fathers like Athanasius of Alexandria in his book on the incarnation used terms like Kyrios and Logos and Christos from the Septuagint to defend that Jesus is fully divine. I'm just taking only these three words. There's thousands of words here. So the early church, even creeds like the Nicene Creed, also use the language to clearly say that Jesus is God's Son and shares the same divine nature. So without the words and ideas from the Septuagint, like Kyrios, Logos, and Christos, the early church will not have had the right tools to explain Jesus' identity to the Greek-speaking world. Of course, Hebrew is a profound, but we need a language to reach the Gentile world, and the Koine Greek was the perfect language to reach all these Gentiles. By using the Septuagint, the church fathers helped to preserve the Jewish scriptures and created a Christian way of speaking about God that shaped both the Greek and later Latin churches, even till today, Roman Catholic, even till today. So the use of the Septuagint still influence how we translate and understand the Bible till today. Even now, translators face the same challenge, how to express. Translators are people like me and you, just to tell you. But they are much more scholarly. But they try their best how to express sacred, holy ideas in different languages without losing their meanings. It's hard. Like in the time of the Septuagint translation, it's not just about words. It's about shaping how people understand God and faith and salvation and how to translate it to a Greek way of speaking. So the Septuagint reminds us they've done a great job. That even just give you an example, even today, there are more than 450 English Bible translations. Each vary by philosophy, by dynamic, by paraphrasing, by literal, that every translation carries meaning and power across cultures and generations. So translations are important and have quality and have depth to it. Every translation. Let me conclude for you. So the Septuagint stands as one of the most influential culture and theological bridges between ancient Judaism and emerging Christianity. By making the Hebrew scripture accessible to the Greek-speaking world, the Septuagint not only preserved Jewish religious heritage in the diaspora, as a result, it's also provided the foundational vocabulary and interpretation framework for the early Christians' faith. I mentioned these key theological terms like Kyrios, Logos, and Christos. Only one example, it's rooted in the Septuagint translation and adopted by the New Testament authors and later elaborated upon by the church fathers to articulate the divine nature, mission, and identity of Jesus Christ. So without the Septuagint, Christianity expansion beyond the bounds of Hebrew-speaking communities would have been dramatically hindered and its theological articulation profoundly different. If there was, think about it, if there was no Septuagint translation, I think the gospel would want to reach the entire world. God used that Greek translation. So the enduring legacy of the Septuagint reminds us that the translation is an important and transformative act that shapes religious identity, theological thoughts, and the course of history itself through many generations, even till today. So the research I've done, I just want to tell you, I've done through a lot of biographies, and I used a lot of books and for ancient early church fathers and some academic writings. So this is all the biography I just used from different important scripts. Thank you so much. You see, Tony, I made it so quick. I made it so quick before 1 hour.
That was great, Andre. That was
Any questions? Any comments? Any questions? Please ask the hard questions for Tony. Give me the easy ones. Ask any hard question, please. Let me know. Any comments? What did you learn today? Did you learn something new? And I want just to, in few words, every translation is profound, depends on the period of history. See God's hands on every period of history. God uses people, us, to spread the word. So it's not about the Hebrew, it's not about the Aramaic, it's not about the Greek. But I want to tell you, the first level, if you want to go in depth, you study Greek. Second level, you want more go in depth, you study Hebrew. And the third depth layer is Aramaic. So these are the 3 layers of going in depth.